Imagine a quarterback whose career spanned almost 2 decades. A quarterback who, against all odds, managed to carve out a legacy with not a single team per se, but with nearly a third of the NFL. From Harvard grad to bearded journeyman, Ryan Fitzpatrick defied convention and expectation. Fitzpatrick, or Fitzmagic, or Fitztragic, whatever he was during the time, managed to carve out one of the most unique careers in NFL history. From being 5 picks away from being Mr. Irrelevant in 2005, to his rivalry with Tom Brady, to his swagged out attire in Tampa, you'd be forgiven if you weren't sure where his career stacks up against the rest of the quarterbacks in NFL history. So with that being said, let's dive into the career of the Amish rifle to see how good he actually was. If you didn't know, you know now that Ryan Fitzpatrick is smart. He was so gifted academically that he would attend Harvard for college, and by 2003, Fitz would be named the starter. And by 2004, he would guide Harvard to a 10-0 record in a season where they would win the Ivy League championship. Fitzpatrick had a decent run during this year, tossing 13 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, earning him Ivy League Player of the Year in the process. But full disclosure here, guys, Ivy Leagues, at least when it comes to sports, are in a different category altogether. Player of the Year in the Ivy League is not the same as being Heisman in Division I. So despite the undefeated record, the accolades, and hitting a near perfect score on the Wonderlic test, Ryan was not a very sought after prospect when the draft came about in 2005. In a draft where the biggest story was Aaron Rodgers slipping in the first round, Fitzpatrick would actually slide all the way to the 7th round, where the Rams would select him with the 250th overall pick, making him the 14th and final quarterback taken in 2005's draft. Fitzpatrick would start off as St. Louis's third stringer, but would get his opportunity in Week 11 after injuries to Mark Bulger and Jamie Martin. It's here where the man who was 5 picks away from being Mr. Irrelevant shocked everyone into thinking he was the answer. Boy, does that epitomize this man's career, but I guess we'll get to that when we get to it, right? Entering the game in the second quarter, Fitzpatrick would go on a tear against the Houston Texans. With just 3 quarters of action, Fitzpatrick would throw 310 yards and 3 touchdowns. Did I mention this is just in 3 quarters? Fitz would help the Rams win in overtime 33-27. Fitz would look to keep this magic going in Week 12 as he was officially named the starter onward, but that magic quickly turned into tragic. He would go on to lose all 3 of his games, tossing 1 touchdown and an excruciating 8 interceptions in that span. And some people think he became Fitzpatrick and Fitztragic and Fitzmagic in later in his career. Bro, he was doing this by year 1. This run with the Rams, just like most of his time with, well, pretty much all the teams he eventually played with, followed a very similar formula. He'd usually impress in a big way, get the opportunity to be the man, and would usually fall on his face soon thereafter. Fitz would stick around in St. Louis in 2006, but would eventually be traded to the Bengals in 2007. After being relegated to clipboard duty for Cincy in 07, Fitz would get his chance after an injury to Carson Palmer in 2008. He would start in a total of 12 games, throwing for nearly 2,000 yards with 8 touchdowns compared to 9 interceptions, and would rank 3rd among quarterbacks with 304 rushing yards. In the following season, Fitzpatrick would join the Bills, where he was supposed to just be their backup, but like before, found his way into the starting lineup again. After an injury to QB1 Trent Edwards, boy does he need his own story, Fitz would take over and had very similar stats as he did with the Bengals. This was though enough to pique interest in new head coach Chan Gailey for the upcoming 2010 season. After an 0-2 start, the Bills would insert Fitz into the lineup, and this is where his career really began to take off. In typical Fitzmagic fashion, he would give you a tease as to what he was capable of to give you hope that he could be the guy long term. His Fitzmagic came in a Week 11 game against my Bengals, where despite being down 31-14 at halftime, Fitz and the offense would muster 5 touchdowns in the second half alone, while the defense held Cincy to just 0 points in a 49-31 Fitzmagic special win. Overall, the team went 4-12 this year, but Fitz himself did go 4-9, so a little bit better, right? He showed enough with his 23 touchdowns and exactly 3,000 yards in 12 games to be the man in Buffalo going forward, at least for now. In 2011, he started off stronger than ever. The magic lasted for a while, as Fitz was even the player of the month in the month of September, and the Bills were 3-0, then 5-2 at different points in the season. But if you know anything about the Amish Rifle's career, you know that magic will eventually turn into tragic. From week 9 onward, the Bills would win just one more game while losing another 7 in that time. They'd finish with their 5-2 start, turning into a 6-10 record. While the defense did him no favors, Fitz would just make too many costly turnovers that wouldn't help anyone. In a 3-game stretch against the Jets, Cowboys, and Dolphins, he would throw 2 touchdowns to 7 interceptions, which also included a 48.1 average passer rating, and the Bills were outscored in these 3 games 26-106. It's like this guy's the yin-yang of football. You know, if he'll have a great 3-game stretch, he's got to give you 3 really bad ones to make sure it's all perfectly balanced. 2012 was another up-and-down 6-10 campaign that resulted in Gailey getting fired, as well as Fitz not being re-signed. After a quick stint with the Titans, where he did find his way back on the field, he was brought in by the Texans and head coach Bill O'Brien in 2014. This pairing of offensive-minded Bill O'Brien with our bearded gunslinger seemed like a good fit at first, as the team managed a 3-1 start. But can you guess what happened next? He follows this up by losing 4 of his next 5 games and ultimately gets benched following their bye week. Somehow, someway though, my man Fitz just keeps finding his way back on the field after serving clipboard duty, as the new quarterback Brian Mallett, RIP, would eventually get benched himself in favor of Fitzpatrick. And of course, Fitz does what Fitz does, and in his return to the lineup against the Titans in week 13, Fitzpatrick would throw an astonishing 358 yards, 0 interceptions, and 6 touchdowns, en route to a 45-21 victory. I have never covered a player that has been this hot and cold. 6 touchdowns, no interceptions, in a season where he was already benched once. Anyway, this game did rebuild trust in the guy, but it was short-lived, as he would suffer a fractured tibia in week 15, which would ultimately end his season. Despite the phenomenal 6-touchdown game, Houston felt Ryan had become expendable and shipped him off to the Jets for a late-round pick. It's here where he would reunite with Chan Gailey and would arguably have his best ever stint with any team thus far. Well, maybe just for a season anyway. In 2015, Fitz was thrust into the starting lineup yet again, this time due to Geno Smith getting his jaw broken by his own teammate before the season even began. I swear, if you're a starter in the league, the last guy you want as your backup has to be Ryan Fitzpatrick, because you know there's something in the air or something that this guy carries with him that you know you're going to get benched either because you're going to play like ass or you're going to get hurt. And that's kind of a real uncomfortable feeling, you know what I mean? Geno's injury turned out to be a good thing for Fitzpatrick though, as he turned out his best season throughout his 10-year career to this point, tossing 31 touchdowns to 15 interceptions, nearly 4,000 passing yards, and he would guide the team to a 10-6 record. Unfortunately, they did lose the tiebreaker to the Steelers for the 6th seed, so the Jets would ultimately miss the playoffs. While this seemed great for the most part on paper, one huge Fitz-tragic game essentially caused the Jets to miss the playoffs. It happened in the final game of the season, where with a win, they would have been 11-5 and would have finished with a better record than Pittsburgh. But Fitz-tragic would appear its head in the worst possible time. Fitz and the Jets would lose to the Bills, who at this point had nothing to play for. Fitzpatrick would complete 16 of his 37 pass attempts, but more crucially, the man would throw 3 costly interceptions in the 4th quarter, thus sealing the fate for New York as that franchise continues to be snake-bitten year in and year out. Unfortunately, Fitz-tragic was here to stay for the following season. There was no sign of Fitz magic anywhere, as he would just keep losing and suffer an injury in the final stretch of the season, and the 10-year vet would have to start again with another team. By the 2017 season, Fitzpatrick was now 35 years old and now on his 7th team, this time signing with the Bucs. As you guys know by this point with this story, the starter will go down with injury or poor performance. And who was the starter during this time? That would be none other than one Jameis Winston. He would go down in a Week 6 game, and Fitz would enter the second quarter against the Cardinals, And of course, he would throw 3 touchdowns to 2 interceptions and nearly 300 yards in a traditional first game Fitzpatrick style. 2018, Winston would begin the season suspended for 3 games, so Ryan would seize the opportunity, and he did deliver, at first of course. The Bucs would start off the season 2-0, in a large part due to Ryan's play. This is when things seemed fantastic in Tampa. Ryan threw 8 touchdowns and over 400 yards in both of these first 2 games. And if you guys remember, this is when he was on top of the world, and he would come out in the press conference after the game with Deshaun Jackson's attire. This was peak Fitzmagic. But I'm sure you can say it with me from here on out. Fitzmagic would soon turn into Fitz-tragic. The Bucs wouldn't win another game with Ryan as their starter. They would lose to Philly, then lose to Chicago, with the Bears game specifically being a brutal 48-10 beatdown. Jameis and Fitzpatrick would trade off getting benched for one another throughout the season, because that's what you do when you got 2 reckless gunslingers at quarterback. Ryan would get cracks to play in 4 more games, but the magic was all but gone by week 10. I think this season perfectly exemplifies Fitzmagic versus Fitztragic. If you look at his first 2 games, Ryan had 8 touchdowns to just 1 interception, and he would also throw for over 880 yards and had a 144 passer rating or higher. In his final 2 games, 0 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, a combined 573 yards, a 64 average passer rating, and an 0-2 record. After this game against the Giants, Fitzpatrick would never play again for the Buccaneers. And if you thought it ended with the Bucs, you are sorely mistaken. In 2019, he would sign with the Dolphins and would beat out Josh Rosen for the starting position. Dolphins fans may want to look away for this next part though, because in the first 2 games of this season, the Dolphins would be outscored 10-102. 2 games, 10-102. Just let that sink in. Fitz had back-to-back miserable games, but it was hard to blame the guy 100%, as clearly the defense was non-existent and the offense had no weapons to speak of. Fitzpatrick would end up being benched, but thankfully for Fitz anyway, his competition was Josh Rosen, so he quickly won the job back by week 7. He would hold on to it and somehow managed 5 wins out of this horrid Dolphins roster. The clock was running out for the Ivy Leaguer as the Dolphins would use their 5th overall pick for Tua Tagovailoa. Fitzpatrick did manage to beat out the Alabama product in training camp and was named the starter. That lasted for 6 weeks though, as he was relegated to backup by week 8, and as he always does, the ever-resilient Fitz would find his way back on the field yet again. This time, it was due to the rookie's poor performance and injury to his thumb. The most noteworthy moment for Ryan's season here, which I think could summarize what Fitzmagic truly was, came in the final moments against the Raiders in week 16. Down 2 with less than 20 seconds to go, Ryan drops back and launches a pass down the left side, taking a brutal face mask in the process. Fitz not only managed to get the ball off while his face and neck were being yanked, but this was damn near a perfect pass. This would set up the game-winning field goal to give the Finns a 1-point victory. This, my fellow football enthusiast, was the last ever sighting of Ryan Fitzmagic, as he'd test positive for COVID in the final game of the season. And after signing with Washington for the 2021 season, he would suffer a season-ending hip injury, which ultimately led him to retire in 2022. Ryan Fitzpatrick had a career one like very few others can relate. It's not often a gunslinging style type of quarterback survives for over a decade in the NFL, but Fitz did just that. How did he manage it? It goes back to the man's incredible intelligence and high football IQ. An NFL playbook is something very difficult to memorize, but Fitz made it look easy. So easy, in fact, that everywhere he went, he could always be a serviceable backup or a stopgap starter. Since there's always a team out there looking for a decent quarterback, and Fitz was a guy that never caused drama nor had a problem coming off the bench, he was the perfect player coach a team could always use. The term gunslinger can have negative connotations, but remember that those guys are also known for big plays and sparking a lackluster offense. But when you get too much of the bad to go with the good, eventually it gets to a point where it's just not sustainable. So even though he had his chances and did carve out a unique legacy in his 17 years in the NFL, if I had to give the career of Ryan Fitzpatrick a grade, A career that included for throwing nearly 35,000 yards, 225 touchdowns to 169 interceptions, a 59 and 87-1 record, but 0 Pro Bowls across 9 teams, I'd have to give that career a C+. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for your support, and until next time, y'all, shaboy!